We are here to talk about my spring break trip to Walt Disney World, Guardians of the Galaxy, Tron, Luminous, so much more. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 228 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton, and I'm going to set the stage for you briefly about this episode, which is part one of my trip report from our recent trip to Walt Disney World. We were there from March 18th through March 21st. We had 3 park days, stayed at Port Orleans French Quarter. I went just with my daughter, Etta. First time we've done that. She just turned 11 years old. I am going to talk on this episode about 2 of the days at EPCOT and the Magic Kingdom. Also talk about my first rides on Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind and TRON Lightcycle Run. My first time seeing Luminous. Also went to Journey of Water inspired by Moana, so a lot of firsts on this trip. And surprisingly, not crazy crowded. So we're going to dive into everything, so let's get right to it. Here is my Walt Disney World trip report. That, of course, is the sounds of riding Spaceship Earth, and you can make out Judi Dench's voice a little bit in the background. I did not record any audio clips during the trip. My goal was for us to have fun, but I did shoot a few videos, just some shorts for YouTube and everything else, so I'll include a little bit of audio here and there, as much just to offset all of hearing from me. And my goal for this is to talk about everything we did and all the fun memories and the things we did that were cool, give my reactions to some of the new attractions, and also try to give some tips, maybe if you're going soon, from things I learned and what things cost, like I did with the preview, and just to talk about how we navigated the parks during what I anticipated was going to be a very busy time. If you have been following news on Disney and crowds and everything else, you know this was actually not that busy of a time. I can hardly believe it. And when we were there, it took me a little while to realize that because I was so bracing myself for big crowds. And then I thought maybe the first day was just not that representative, maybe just EPCOT on that day. And the Magic Kingdom was more crowded, but then we went to the studios and it wasn't crowded either. And then comparing the wait times that we had versus the wait times that they are seeing this week when I'm recording, which is Easter week, and the week before we went, which was more the college spring break, we lucked out so much. It was not planned that way. It just happened to be when our spring break was here in St. Louis. It worked out so well. Even like the traffic from the airport to the resort, and then how sleepy the resort felt, which I think a lot of that is French Quarter and how it's set up. But even so, I don't believe the resort was full. It was so nice just to not have to deal with the type of crowd you expect at spring break, because that carries over to everything. It's not just the wait times on the rides, which were a bit lower. It's also the pathways and navigating through that. It's the food. It's just the amount of people you see anywhere you go. Lines for restrooms, shops, anything. When you walk around that and you're like, we can walk around. It's okay. And I don't want to sell it as being empty. I've been there, whether it was in 2005 when travel was really down, in January when that used to be a dead season, super empty. I've been there in September, where I happened to be there in 2019, right after a tropical storm arrived. So no one was really there. And so I have been there when the parks have been empty. This was not that level. At best, it was in the middle, like a 5 or 6 out of 10, whatever scale you use. It was definitely not the 8 or 9 out of 10 or even 10. And that was great. That allowed us to do so much more. And also, too, the weather was really nice. Our first day, the high was like 65, which was a bit cold in the morning and at night, I have to say. 70s the other two. And I'm glad they weren't because the Magic Kingdom still felt pretty warm even with its high around 75. So we lucked out in terms of crowds, we lucked out in terms of weather, and overall just had a great trip. And I will talk about a few things here and there that didn't go so well, whether it's with rides breaking down or things I noticed with effects on rides and everything else, and how it affected our touring and what we had to do when things broke and all those things. But overall, I'm just going to say up front, this is going to be a pretty positive trip report. Even Genie Plus worked pretty well, and I do have hesitations with that, but overall, things worked like they should. Our Magic Band Plus worked on our room fine. We didn't have problem reserving things. The Wi-Fi was okay. It's just you could go down the list. It was easy to get food using mobile order. But setting the stage up front, my reaction to this trip is very positive, and even though it cost a lot, Disney's prices keep going up, especially around a peak time like spring break. There was no discount on Genie Plus for the crowds that did not materialize. It's almost like a little bit. We went in 2022, Disney World, super packed, but that was the first time since the pandemic started that we went, and so a lot of that you look at more positively because you're just so happy to be there. Disneyland was mobbed last year. Right after Memorial Day, we're also there the last day of Splash Mountain. The parks like this, I think this is the slowest I've been to the parks since maybe like 2011, 2012. And that was in January, very different. Lowest wait times I've seen in a long time. But since that point, we've gone either Martin Luther King weekend a couple times or spring break beyond the one time I went solo in September. But in terms of going during a busy time, setting aside the September time, this was really cool. But let's dive right in to our first day. I'll talk a little bit quickly about the arrival, but then I'm going to spend most of my time today on Magic Kingdom and EPCOT with a focus on touring, attractions, what I loved about the new attractions I did, some things I didn't like as much, and then Genie Plus. So let's dive right into the start of the trip. One of my big goals for this trip was to see the nearly completed transformation of EPCOT. Given that we were doing a short trip of just 3 days, I think it made sense to start with EPCOT, and that was for several reasons. First of all, I wanted to stay for the full night to see Luminous, so that knocked out the final day when we were flying back late, which ended up being the studios. Also, I don't think it's great to start with the Magic Kingdom because that's typically the most crowded park. And while Epcot is more walking, it's a little more laid back in terms of the types of rides you're doing and the amount of people, fewer little kids. And so I thought Epcot seemed like the great first choice. And also there were a lot of new things to see, including you just heard a few seconds from Journey of Water inspired by Moana, which we saw. Overall, it just seemed to make sense to do Epcot first. So, of course, as Disney has you do, you have to buy Genie Plus. Well, you don't have to. Genie Plus is not available to buy until midnight the night before. Now, of course, with the crowds we had, I could have easily bought Genie Plus at 6:50 in the morning and then immediately made reservations and not done it the night before. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. When you're doing a short trip like this, as opposed to a week or 10 days or something, I wanted to play it super safe. If we missed and somehow didn't get to buy Genie Plus, that was it. There's no second day. There's no park hopping. We bought a 3-day straight up pass. And most times it's not a big deal because you're staying up pretty late. Our first night we had traveled. Our flight arrived around 5:20. So we got to our resort maybe around 7, had dinner, swam a little bit. And I'm going to talk about the Port Orleans French Quarter in part 2, more detail, but I'll just say everything was great. It was super convenient. It was about 10 o'clock and it's like, okay, now I got to stay up till 12. And of course we were going to get up pretty early the next morning. So I really was hoping before this trip that Disney made it so you could book something in advance. And of course, if they made it where you could reserve Genie Plus in advance, then they would have to require you to buy Genie Plus in advance, which was what I was really hoping there would be some option there. I think they will ultimately get to it. The question is more when, because the benefit of this day of is they can charge variable pricing. Let's say I was locked in at $25 each day for Genie Plus. Then if they raised it higher, which was the case on 2 of the 3 days, then they wouldn't get that extra money. But they would have locked in me buying it, which I know for some people didn't buy it at all. So I bought Genie Plus, which for that day at EPCOT was $19 per person for EPCOT, which that is before they added tax in. So it ended up being a little bit more. My total was $40.48. So $20.24 a person for EPCOT, and that was the cheapest of the three on the trip. Beforehand, I started to get nervous about how well Genie Plus would work given just the expected huge crowds. And I had a listener named Trevor who suggested Standby Skipper, which I had heard of mostly just from Shannon at WW Prep School, had mentioned it on a few podcasts, and I did not know what it was. And he explained that it was a way for essentially you to have an assist with booking Genie Plus reservations more automatically by setting up searches. It's an app, it is a paid app. First I went, I could do it myself. I think that'll be fine. But then I looked into it more, and I promise I am getting nothing from them. I paid for it. Basically, you could buy it for either $25 a day on your trip, not per person total, or $45 for 7 days. So I looked into it and I went, well, if they could provide any assistance, even with the morning, because again, I'm the only adult. I don't have a second adult I do lightning lanes and then she does individual lightning lanes or virtual queue or whatever. So I'm doing it all. So I thought, okay, this is a service where after I buy Genie Plus, I put in what I want them to reserve for me. They show up as a friend on your My Disney experience. So they have no access to any payment information or anything else. So basically they send an invite, you accept it, and then Standby Skipper is a friend for me. And then they can book Genie Plus for me. Not individual lightning lanes, not virtual queue, just lightning lanes under Genie Plus for you. So I thought, I'll give it a shot. If it's terrible, it doesn't work, I could talk about it on the show. I'll try it. So I paid the $45. So, we're adding up on the fees here, but that isn't necessary. But essentially what happens then is after I bought Genie Plus at midnight, I set up a search. For EPCOT, I set it up to book Test Track as soon as possible. And I know you could say Ratatouille is the best option, but Test Track is the thing that Etta wanted to do more than any other attraction at EPCOT, possibly in all of Walt Disney World. So the thought was, I'm going to have them book it. Hopefully they can book it early in the morning maybe, or at least fairly early. Because in 2022, when I tried to book Test Track, I was a little slow to it, and all of a sudden we had it at 8 p.m. And that was when Ratatouille was an individual lightning lane, so Test Track and Frozen were the two most popular, and Test Track was arguably the most popular. Now with Ratatouille, that gives a little cover. My goal then was to book a virtual queue for Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind and an individual lightning lane right afterwards for that ride, likely for late morning, thinking that likely the virtual queue would show up later in the day and we could do it twice. But I was able to get a virtual queue. It wasn't super early on. I think it estimated we were going to come back, the virtual queue that we got around 2 p.m. And then I went ahead and bought the individual lightning lane because one, I wanted to be sure, virtual queue is not guaranteed if the ride goes down for a while or anything, or what if it happens at a time we're just not nearby. But I thought with individual lightning lane, I likely could make sure that we're going to get to ride it. Because again, I have never ridden Cosmic Rewind before. So I went ahead and purchased an individual lightning lane for both Etta and I. She was totally interested in riding it. And the price for this day for Cosmic Rewind was $15 per guest. And I basically could choose when it would be. I don't think I could do 9 a.m., but I put it 10:40 to 11:40 that morning. And for the $15 a person with tax, it ended up being $31.96. So about $16 per person to ride it. That's great. We're all set. And then Standby Skipper booked Test Track 9 to 10 in the morning. So they got the earliest possible because 9 o'clock was the opening. There's 8:30 early entry. My original thought was as a resort guest, we would try to get there around 8:30, possibly even a little earlier. We didn't get there that early, but we did okay. We actually we drove, so we ended up leaving French Quarter about 8:30. And French Quarter is extremely close to EPCOT. You basically come out of the resort, turn left, and then turn right immediately, circle around, and you are at EPCOT. It was less than 10 minutes and ultra convenient. French Quarter is a great place for staying at EPCOT. So we were able to get to the park with everything in hand. Standby Skipper had set it up very well. We got there about 8:50. They parked us way off to the left, but I noticed up front, not that many cars. And I wondered if it was just the time we were getting there pretty early, but early entry had been going for about 20 minutes. And by the time we got all the way to the gate, it actually ended up being around 9. Walked right in. Technically, it was open, so you don't have to worry. There wasn't anything with early entry. I also got to say, security, the way Disney has changed it now, where you don't have to go to a separate line unless they pull you aside for bags, super fast. I didn't have a bag. I had a very small bag. Walk right through. Security was a breeze. Everyday security was easy, and getting the lines for tickets were super short. We never had any issues with lines for security or for the gate or anything else. All of that was super smooth. And so that's very different than even past with Disneyland or even Disney World, where there's always some point where you end up waiting a while, especially as you're getting there around opening. We were getting there right around the official opening, had no problem. Went in, immediately went to Test Track, and just had a great time, as always. Designed a car, it was a lightning lane, so it was pretty quick. We did wait a little bit, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but not bad. I will say something about Test Track. I know everything's been very positive. Test Track is really showing its age. Yes, the actual driving of the car, and I mean, the big sprint at the end where you go over 60 miles an hour still feels great, still super fun. Everybody was happy. We did notice a couple things. The main thing is some of the effects in the ride aren't working anymore. And I think this connects to the fact that Test Track likely was going to be closed. The last I heard was in midsummer, but the Test Track is going to close, I suspect, after Tiana's opens. There's probably a connection with big headliners at the resort. Again, just my speculation, for its overhaul, which then would carry it into next year. The things that weren't working. One, the second time we rode it later, our designing of the car, the screen wasn't working well, but that's a small thing. The bigger things were, the uneven driving at the beginning where it's like you're going over all the blocks. That was nothing. That wasn't working at all. The environmental conditions, no hot, no cold, both times also wasn't working. But here's the biggest thing I will say. Those are pretty big. But the biggest thing, the barrier test, where you're going to go and, they make it even clearer in the original Test Track. And then you drive and at the last minute, the door opens and then leads you outside, which is kind of a neat effect, especially if you've never ridden it before. They just had it open. It was like the old Norway Theater where they just started leaving the doors open. I suspect that door wasn't working right, and they just decided not to spend the time to fix it. So it did eliminate a little bit of that excitement of you're going and then it opens and then you're outside. Instead, you go right outside. Test Track was still very fun. We ended up doing it twice on the trip, but a little disappointing because I have not seen issues like that with Test Track in the past. Sometimes the designing of the car is a little weird. Also, our car didn't scan, small things. But this is something I noticed, which Disney typically has when they're going to have a ride that is set for a major overhaul. They're less likely to do maintenance on it or to fix issues when they know that they're going to spend a bunch of time fixing it, possibly have to have the ride down. I don't know if that's the case, and then turn around and do a bigger overhaul where they're going to change a lot of it, which I understand to a point, but also found a little frustrating. So after that, we did Standby. We did Mission Space Green, which I've done several times. I think the screen is kind of showing its age a bit. Didn't really do that much for me. I think it's kind of fun to press the buttons. There was absolutely no wait. I have nothing against Mission Space. I mean, I know it replaced Horizons. We weren't going to do the orange version, and when you do the green version, you get to experience sitting in that cramped area, and the launch is still fun, and pressing the buttons, but obviously the big draw of Mission Space sometimes is the spinning. Oh, I should also mention, I set it up where right when we scanned into Test Track, it would book another lightning lane. Standby Skipper did book Ratatouille, though Ratatouille at that point had jumped pretty far, but we were able to get one. It was about 7:20 at night. But we were able to lock in because I know Etta really wanted to do Ratatouille. Of course, that meant that we weren't going to be able to get another one for 2 hours. Because it was just a little after 9, we won't have to wait that much longer than people that had booked at 7 a.m. didn't get their first one till 11 if they didn't use it. But we locked in Ratatouille. So 2 of the big headliners were locked in place. I don't know how much. I probably could have done it myself. But one thing I will say about the app is when it's super busy, I think it will find you sometimes times you didn't expect. But the biggest thing for me is just being able to set it. I didn't have to set an alarm. I wouldn't forget about it. I know there's only a few things that are kind of that we really wanted to knock out, which as far as Lightning Lane, it's really the top 3 attractions in the park. And so I just put it there, and then I would do this on the trip constantly, and then we're enjoying the attraction, and I'm not constantly like, oh God, I got to book it, or I forgot, or I got to refresh. And you just let it do its thing. And that led to a little less time on the phone and a little more time with just doing what we wanted to do. So next up was Spaceship Earth. The animatronics looked good. It didn't feel as hot in there. I didn't notice anything not working. Still very solid attraction. It did never really take my picture. The first time, I don't think it took our picture at all. But that's the thing that Etta really enjoys, thinks it's funny to have our pictures on there and stuff. And that's where I think I probably underestimate how many kids or others really enjoy that side of it when I'm like, when are they going to fix the descent? But I will say the first time we rode it, it didn't take our picture at all. The second time it did, but it didn't register me. So it was just her with the computer guy, which also led to some laughs. Yeah, I mean, we know, I've talked about it many times. Spaceship Earth needs to be updated. I'm glad it's there. So it's kind of that be careful what you wish for, because I would hope that Disney would do a good job with Spaceship Earth and recognize what makes it work and not try to shoehorn IP in there or storytelling. Hopefully that idea is gone for good that came out, and they could find a way to kind of honor what it's done and maybe improve it and maybe reintroduce some of the physical sets like the space station and things on the descent. The descent is where it needs help. The going up is still pretty good beyond a few cringeworthy lines from Judi Dench. And so it was time. Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. Here we go. Nope, sorry. It was down. We had taken pictures outside. We're going up. We're ready to do it. We're going to experience it. And it was down. So we'll circle back to that later. One thing is then we had an anytime individual lightning lane, which then we could do whenever it reopens. So the time component became not an issue. And I will say Genie Plus, every time anything went down or anything, worked like a charm. And my anytime lightning lane in other cases, or individual lightning lane here, never taken for the wrong ride or anything like that. Always worked smoothly, so that was good. We briefly stopped in just to get a little snack in Connections Cafe, got some fries, and then, of course, had to stop by the Walt statue, Walt at Dreamers Point. Fun moment there where the cast member used, also cast members were all great with photos or with anything. Really nice. I think when it's not super hot and it's not super crowded, cast members, they're going to really, not that they're not usually nice, but especially in this case, I found them to be extremely pleasant. And any statements, at least from my experience about downward service at Disney or whatever, I did not experience personally on this trip. I had a really good experience the entire time with the cast members. The cast member did something funny where he took all the pictures of us, told us to look at Walt, which led to some funny pictures, but then jumped in and said, I'm going to be in your last picture, and used our phone and took a selfie of himself with us and Walt in the background, which I found to be very funny. I did want to take a moment to mention that EPCOT, if you're going before Communicore Hall opens, so basically in the next 2.5 months or so, the walls are still kind of annoying, especially the spot over by Imagination. Because what I've always appreciated is how you can get to Imagination from over by Canada and vice versa. So there was a case where we had headed over to Canada and we were actually looking at the soft serve ice cream place, which did not have chocolate. So we did not go there. Swirled Showcase. But we walked over there and then we wanted to go to Imagination. And I went, oh, there's a wall there. So then instead of going that way, you end up going all the way back around, circle the wall, you get to see Communicore Hall, and then back over by the land, and then back to Imagination. So Imagination currently is basically a dead end in that corner. You can't go over to World Showcase from that spot. And then later that night, again, after we circled World Showcase, went to Canada, we were blocked off again and had to go all the way right around the land to Imagination. Not that great. So just something to be aware of in terms of your touring. If you're kind of planning it out and you're going in the next few months, is whenever you go to Imagination, try to kind of combine that with the land, and also don't think of that in terms of then we'll just go right to World Showcase. So you just have to plan that, or you just skip it entirely, but how would you want to skip it entirely? Because, of course, Imagination is the home of Big Figment.
It's always a good time to use your imagination, so let the good times roll! Woohoo! You win 1 cent!
Yes, our next stop is Journey into Imagination, and I have important news for you. Unlike in 2022, the skunk smell is working. Yes, we did Journey to Imagination. We actually did it twice because Etta loves that ride. It's okay. I'll just say, people that haven't experienced the original version, that just kind of look at it as kind of this silly little dark ride, I totally get it. I get it that it's a bit much for me, but it's all right. But really the big thing was it was our first time getting the chance. We only did 2 character meet and greets the entire trip. One of them, which I had said beforehand we were definitely doing, was meeting Big Figment, otherwise known as Figzilla, who is quite tall and quite strange looking, not a very long wait at all. Both of us got to meet Figment. I got to give Figment a high five. There were the people that were in line, though, some of them my age or older, were very into meeting Figment. I think this is a home run. Also, that was the big plush that we came home with. Not as big as Big Figment, but that was the big purchase for a souvenir, was that. We went back to Imagination and got it right before we left. So Figment winning, this is another reason why Disney needs to update the ride, because people love Figment. Flower and Gardens got Figment all over. It works, but I had a lot of fun getting the chance to meet Big Figment. Next up was Living at the Land. I don't know what else I could tell you about it. Everything is looking great. I do enjoy the additions they do with kind of the areas that are the edible gardens for Flower and Garden Festival. The ride still looks great. It's drawing a decent line, and I enjoyed it a lot as always. It's one of my favorite things at EPCOT. I actually made a deal where if we were going to do Imagination a second time later, we would also have to do Living with the Land a second time, which we did at like 8:30 at night. And I really like riding it at night. I think the greenhouse looks really cool at night. And it's just so relaxing, especially near the end of the day. I'm not hearing any rumblings at all about that attraction being updated in any way. And it really doesn't need to be. I mean, yes, I love the little tweaks. I'm talking about significant updates. I think the first half is my favorite and really clicks. We had a quick lunch then at Sunshine Seasons. And we then had some time before we could book another lightning lane. So my plan was, I'm going to watch Awesome Planet for the first time. I have watched it on YouTube. Seeing it in person, not that much better. It's not one of those cases like a Circle Vision film or like Impressions to France where you really get a better improvement. Yes, it's a bigger screen. Yes, the best thing is really the wall carpet, I have to say, in the queue area, which of course I pointed out while we were waiting. It was a way to kill 10 minutes because my hope then is we would get to ride Soarin'. We actually had to do that a bit later, but we were able to book it for a bit later. But watched Awesome Planet, I think it's fine. I think the whole real estate thing is a little awkward and not my favorite thing. And I know it fits to kind of Ty Burrell's Modern Family character, but I'm glad it's there versus nothing or versus a 20-year-old film. I think it makes a decent point, but it's kind of we got some time, let's do it. But I appreciate that there are things like that at Epcot, so I don't want them to get rid of things like that. I do think speaking of Imagination, the fact that the Pixar and Short Film Festival is still there is just awful. They need to do something. I assume that will connect to whenever they also update Imagination. Next, we did Nemo. I don't know what else I have to say about Nemo. I've tried to keep this to be a fairly brief trip report, not, rambling for hours. I've talked about Nemo before. I don't love it, but I do appreciate that there are slow-moving dark rides that, unlike Hollywood Studios, which is really missing things like this, I appreciate they have it. The aquarium still is great. Got to look at the manatees, which I also like, and the ride is fine. I do think it needs to be updated. Nemo doesn't need to keep getting lost, but it is what it is. So next up, we went to, you heard the clip earlier, Journey of Water, inspired by Moana. And you know what? This is pretty cool. It's not just because it's new. It's a nice setup. Combining this with the World Celebration Garden, which has tons of seating, and at night looks really cool with the lighting, and there's so much trees and everything else. You add this in, future will look so different. And it's not like we've lost anything essential. I mean, we did lose Fountain of Nations. I'm talking about beyond that. Having all this area, like basically most of it replaced in kind of concrete or areas that just hadn't been used, it's a win, and I think it's quite fun. Now, it was actually getting kind of warm when we were there, even though it was only in the 60s and it had been quite chilly in the morning. I am not complaining about the weather, but we kind of wanted to get a little bit wet, and it was kind of hard, actually. I don't know if they had the water turned down because it was a cooler day. You did get to walk through some mist, but there were a lot of things I enjoyed. I really enjoyed the one where you can play musical notes by touching the water. That's a cool touch. I like when you all raise your arms and like they play the music and it's like, oh, and the water goes up in the air. That was very cool. We meant to get back there at night, but we ran out of time kind of when we were doing the Land and Imagination. Right when we got out of the Land, it was basically 8:58 for a 9 o'clock Luminous, so we didn't get to do it at night, but I've heard it's really cool, and I suspect it would be. The Moana stuff does not pushy at all. And people were enjoying it, and especially given that it wasn't super crowded. Yes, there were a decent amount of people in there, but it wasn't mobbed. I love these type of, you can call them A ticket, B ticket, whatever, areas you can walk through. There's no line. You don't have to wait. Even just like the Walt statue, it's another thing to do. Or Club Cool, which we also did. Just, some small things that really are not a make or break kind of thing, but Epcot is really good. And especially with a lot of things in World Showcase for having these other elements, other areas that you can do which are not so great especially in Hollywood studios. Epcot just really excels at this. But next we did Soarin' Around the World. And can I tell you, if you didn't listen to the preview, how demoralized I was. I have spent, since I decided, well before I decided we wanted to do this trip, my thought was, the things I want to do the most at Epcot are Guardians of the Galaxy and Soarin' over California. Yes, there's Luminous and Journey of Water and everything else, but those two. And Disney announced late February, they waited, they made me think I'd get to, that essentially at the end of February, it would go back to Around the World. It makes sense logistically because they were adding Soarin' over California in California for the DCA Food and Wine Festival. So like they did last year, when we also just missed it on the other end, I thought Soarin' Around the World is fine. I still enjoy it. I think there are scenes that are good, and you do see a lot of people like the transitions, so I'm not begrudging that. I think certain scenes really flop, and then other scenes are really good. And there's nothing particularly terrible. I don't like the CGI. I've talked about this so much, but I'll just say that it's a solid ride. I'm glad that it's there versus nothing, but I think it's a pretty big drop off from what to me would be like a headliner attraction. Okay, so let's talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. We circled back after doing Soarin'. It was open, used our individual lightning lane, and actually our virtual queue was called shortly after that, strangely enough. Now, I will say beforehand, I had read quite a bit about how a decent amount of people got motion sick on Cosmic Rewind. I haven't really had issues with that. I don't ride super spinners, but I didn't have any issues with all the coasters at Kings Island, except for the Bat. That kind of got me a little bit, weirdly enough. And I didn't have an issue with like Time Traveler at Silver City, Great America coasters I did, hyper coasters, even a Giga coaster at Kings Island. So I wasn't that worried about me, and I figured worst case, I'd feel a little weird and I'd be okay. I wasn't sure about Etta. She never had an issue on a ride, and she's done, everything basically at Disney beyond, there were a few things she hadn't done, but she's done Test Track, Flight of Passage, Star Tours, no issues with coasters. Did okay on Mission Breakout. So I thought she'd be okay. But I was a little worried for her because she has gotten a little motion sick in the car before. So I was like, that was just on a long trip. She wasn't paying attention, that's what happens. But maybe a little nervous. So I kind of went in with a little trepidation. Then I heard a lot of people in the line talking about how this was so intense and how they felt a little sick after. A lot of adults really talking about it. It's the most intense coaster here. And I was like, oof, I don't know if this is what I want to hear. But there was also this weird sense of anticipation. And I looked around and there were little kids. There were people probably over 70. It was all different ages. So I'm like, okay, I feel pretty safe that everybody's going to be okay. And the thing about Guardians is we do kind of skip through the early pre-shows. Like we didn't even see the pre-show where Peter Quill talked about like the old Epcot attractions and all that. We kind of flew through all that, but you still do see some. Of course, you do have that room where you stand there and nothing happens. You go in another door, and then there's that kind of cool effect where the wall, which you think is going to open, kind of becomes something very different, and then you go a different way, which I thought was a nice effect. Some fun work there to Glenn Close, but especially Terry Crews, just getting the right idea of being serious, but also kind of silly in the same way. Have a little bit from the Guardians in the part that I saw. And then you get to the load area. I think the load area with loading both sides, a la Big Thunder or something, super smart. It loaded quite quickly, quicker than Tron, quicker than a lot of newer rides that I've seen. And I think that's going to be extremely beneficial when they start introducing standby lines at some point. I would think maybe after the opening of Tiana's, but it's hard to say. I mean, they'll still do individual lightning lanes, but when are they going to ultimately switch over to standby? Which I think will make things a lot easier at Epcot overall. And they'll probably do this one before Tron. But the loading setup, very cool. And the ride vehicles look really nice. And I like that there's only a few people in them, though you're kind of going together with others. But you kind of feel like you're having your own experience, even if you're in the big train of individual vehicles. We ended up in the front, the very front, which I had heard up front was the smoothest, but also not the best for motion sickness. Though I'd heard if you sit on the left, it's better. So I had Etta sit on the left side. I don't know if that really made a difference at all. It's so hard to say. What can I say about this ride? It's a home run. It's awesome. It doesn't feel super out of place in Epcot because of just the kind of space theme with the Big Bang and the Celestial. And yes, it's silly and has Guardians and everything, and it's not perfect. But on its own as an attraction, awesome, incredible. One of those where I'm like, there's so much happening, more than just a one-trick pony. Yes, you have the backwards launch. But I think even more than Rock and Roller Coaster with its launch, which is a little fiercer, but is kind of the biggest part of that attraction. This one seems it's quite long, like one of those where I almost was like, wow, this just keeps going. Lots of cool effects, and just the backwards launch is great. And just there's a lot of different motion, and then you have what's going on. It's kind of frenetic. And then, of course, the music, our song, in case you're curious, One Way or Another by Blondie. Solid choice, I will say. Just really cool. I feel like I will enjoy it more even the next time I ride it, because the first time you're still a little nervous about motion sickness or what's coming next. I'd heard there's some crazy moment with the moon, and I was like, oh, which that part is really cool, where you kind of spin around and do like a helix around the moon as you're going downward. But I feel like it incorporates, there's some areas that feel a little where you kind of go through a little test tracky. So it fits well near that. There are also other areas that remind me a lot of Space Mountain, where you're kind of going, you don't know where you're going. It's a bit dark and you go down and up. The building just feels gigantic. And I know it is, but I'm just saying it's not one of those cases where you're like, what do they spend the money on? I don't know. I could totally tell what they're spending the money on here. And I will say, I felt fine afterwards. I mean, it's very intense. Etta felt fine afterwards. The one thing is, she was like, I don't know if I want to do it twice in a row. Because our virtual queue didn't show up 6 hours later. It showed up right after. And granted, you do have some time. It was also, we walked by the line for the virtual queue and it wasn't really moving. So she knew that it was going to be a longer wait. If we'd been able to jump right back on it, it might have been a different story. And I accepted that. I was cool with it. We got to ride it. And I know we could have done it twice, and that was the idea. But this will happen again. We'll talk about this in a little bit. But just overall I will say, the only downside I'll say is I don't think the outside looks very cool. It's just kind of there. I mean, it reminds me of a lot of other EPCOT pavilions, really, where the outside is fine, but it's not kinetic or really cool or anything like that. A little bit, I mean, Mission Space looks cool on the outside, but you think about just kind of entering a lot of these pavilions, it kind of fits in that way with EPCOT, which I guess makes sense. But compared to Tron, it doesn't look as impressive as the area. It's not like you go, oh, I want to go hang out by this area or something because I love the music or anything else. But at least when I was there, it was just kind of there, and everyone was a little confused about where do we go in and all this stuff. But once you get inside, the pre-shows look good. Everything looks really modern and big and impressive. And then the ride itself is really good. That's all I will say. It's one of those rides where it's thrilling enough for coaster fans and people that want thrills, but still has that theming and the way the car, it's not really a spinning coaster. It's more that like you spin one way, you spin another. You're going backwards, you're going forward. You always feel a little disoriented, but I felt okay. I never felt like sick during it or I wanted to get off or scared. I'm just fascinated by it. And it's one of those that I think I want to ride over and over. I don't mean over and over like 10 times a day. I mean, I really want to get back and ride it because I feel like there's so much more I didn't even see. And you see different things possibly in the front versus back, depending on where you're facing and everything else. It's really good. It fits better in EPCOT than I expected. And it really changes the whole feeling of that park because people want to ride it so much. I'm not saying it's going to draw 1 million people. I think it's really great and is keeping people over on that side along with Test Track and hopefully alleviating a little bit of the pressure on Ratatouille and Frozen. And if they can add some few more things to EPCOT, could really be that way. So I'm going to move a little quicker here through what we did after this. We did Spaceship Earth again, which I already referenced with me not getting the picture, but Etta getting it. Grand Fiesta Tour, fine. It is what it is. I appreciate it. Etta enjoyed it. And then we went back and did Test Track again, which I did not expect we would do. But amazingly enough, the standby wait said 50 minutes, which for about 4:30 p.m. or so is pretty low. And we only waited 25. To give you an idea of how the waits were and everything else, the fact that we only waited 25 for 50 minutes and that even some points it was 30, 40 minutes. And just same with like Frozen and Ratatouille, they kind of veered between 40, 50 and then 60, 70. But that's about as low as you're going to get for those. And same issues with Test Track with the effects and everything. But the line's not bad at all. And also, we did a good job there, too. You can see we're waiting on like a 5:30 Lightning Lane for Frozen. We went up and did Grand Fiesta Tour. Etta really wanted to do Test Track. Easy to get back over there because it's not blocked off like Imagination. But getting the chance to do Test Track twice. I mean, look at this day. We did Imagination twice. We did Living with the Land twice. We did Spaceship Earth twice. We did Test Track twice. The first three I could see not that hard to do. I did not expect to do test track twice unless we did single rider. And I've never waited in that standby line before. I've always done the equivalent of fast pass or lightning lane or single rider, never just done standby. Saw a few screens with interviews and stuff that I'd never seen before, but really easy wait, not bad at all. Next up was our Frozen Lightning Lane. The Frozen animatronics are really wearing out. I don't know what it is. They just don't look as sharp. The screens don't look as good. Similar for the dwarves on Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, but really seeing it here. I still like Frozen Ever After, but I did not notice 2 years ago that the animatronics look like that. Everything just looks a little shaky. I don't know if I've just seen some of the newer versions, like of Elsa or even of Tiana that's coming, and it might be more impressive. Did not find these looking that good, but still enjoy Frozen. Would not enjoy it for waiting an hour, but it was very crowded in that building. We were able to get right through, and that's the benefit of Lightning Lane. We then went on to possibly one of the highlights of the day for me. We were actually going to do American Adventure because we wanted to spend a little time sitting right after we ate. We missed American Adventure by 10 minutes. We weren't going to wait another hour. So I went, hey, 7 o'clock. It's almost 7. It's like 6:40. Why don't we go over and see Impressions to France? Etta was kind of like, I don't know. But I told her, hey, we'll do that. We'll get ice cream. We'll do Ratatouille. And that sold it. I think she enjoyed it, but I love Impressions to France. You know, I've done 2 episodes with Rick Harper, the Imagineer who directed Impressions to France, and love talking with him. So much information. If you like that film and have not heard those episodes, I highly suggest you go back and check those out. Film looks great. Big crowd there, not full, but quite crowded. I think a lot of people, I think we were either the first or second showing. I think it might have been the second showing. As we came in, it was about a 10-minute wait or so. I believe that we just missed the one before it. There's just so much pride. You can see it with the people that work there. I actually received an email from somebody thanking me for those interviews who works on Impression to France. One of the cast members there, and he just talked about how much they appreciate it and how he's talked to people about the podcast and the film. And come on, Disney, give Impressions to France more time. Just switch it to 5 p.m. Small adjustments. If it's 5 to 9, so many more people are going to see it than when it's just like 7 to 9. But I'm so happy I got to do it. Love the movie. My favorite World Showcase film. One of my favorite, possibly my favorite Disney theme park film ever that they've put anywhere. I think pretty much likely. The music works. It feels so classic. Who cares about the fashions from the time? Most of it feels timeless, and you need to go see it. Then we did Remy's. I enjoyed it a little more this time just because last time, a little distracted by the motion sickness. Not for me, from my wife. But I didn't really remember the areas we were kind of going through the sewer, which had a little more physical sets. I will say I think it still doesn't use the trackless ride system that well, not nearly as well as Runaway Railway, but it's fine. I'd say it's better than fine. I'd say it's like B. I like the entry where you get in. That looks cool. I like the area where you're going by all the food. That's a cool physical set area. I just think it's a decent attraction, not a great attraction. That's what I will say there. Like I mentioned, after that, we were kind of narrowing it down. I stopped at the Canada cart. Then we walked all the way back over to Imagination for the second ride. We're nearing the end of our trip, but had to do one more stop at Living with the Land. And like always, it is awesome. And then we had Luminous. We watched Luminous from pretty far away because we were coming out of Living with the Land. We only had a few minutes. Etta still doesn't love the sounds of fireworks. She got a little better with this trip. It didn't really bother her, but we were pretty far away. And so I will say my review comes with the point that it's not from right by the lagoon. So I didn't see all the fountains and everything else. I saw fireworks. I could see them a little bit. I heard the music very well. We were right by the speaker, saw the fireworks, got the general idea, but didn't have a perfect view. So take that with a grain of salt. That I think Luminous is, again, okay. I enjoyed it more than Harmonious. Several reasons. They don't have the barges out all day. And also, it does allow you to see, like we were, from further back without missing as much. Where for Harmonious, I feel like more of the importance was with what you saw in the middle there. And I do think it fits better in EPCOT, especially the songs at the beginning. And that's something also in World Celebration Garden that I think is really good is that music that's playing, that EPCOT theme by Bernard Toprak that's playing all around there really fits with EPCOT, really gives you the right vibe and atmosphere, and I think it's great. So that is another element that I really like of that section of the park. Luminous has that at the beginning, and then during parts of it, I think some of the songs are very well, including the Tarzan song, which I think fits well. I have to agree, though, that it does kind of drop and lose a little bit when the song from Toy Story 2 plays. And the end, the pop song, I could take or leave. Overall vibe, I think if it's fine in Epcot, I think I would stay sometimes to watch it. But I also might just jump on a ride. I don't know. It's a tough call. I will say Illumination Reflections of Earth, I love, but this is not a comparison because I just think different time period, millennium, talk to Don Dorsey about that, what went into that and all that. I don't think Disney could create something like that now. They could bring it back, though, for some special showings. But I think Luminous fixes a lot of the issues with Harmonious, but still could be a little bit better. Just a little bit better, a little bit stronger, and it would really click. I'm not saying they should make any changes to it. I just feel like it's missing something. Fireworks are good. I think the fireworks are strong. A lot of the music is good. I love that they have several songs that are not Disney songs. It's a little weird the way they mix together. I'd say B or B+. It's a solid way to end. Doesn't feel out of place at Epcot. I do think, despite all the songs I like, it is better than Epcot Forever, and it is better than Harmonious, but you're kind of grading on a curve at that point. I'd watch it again. I'd try to watch it from a closer vantage point to have a better grasp of it, but I just say it's kind of okay. It's kind of decent. It works well in Epcot. No big notes there. I'm going to give some more final thoughts about Epcot next week in part 2 when I'm summing up the trip. But for now, I want to get right over to the Magic Kingdom because my thought is this is kind of more the Blitz episode for the first 2 days. I will say, to sum up Epcot a little bit, we did 22 attractions and I did 7 lightning lanes. The lightning lanes were Test Track, Soarin', Spaceship Earth, Frozen, Remy's, Imagination, Living with the Land, and then also an individual lightning lane of Guardians. We didn't need all those. It worked. The most we used for the ones that were most important were Frozen and Ratatouille, which saved us a good hour each probably, and then about 20 minutes on Test Track for one. Some of the other ones saved us 10. Some of the other ones saved us nothing. But we at least saved several hours, which I'd say my $20 after tax was worth it. So let's move on to the Magic Kingdom and talk a bit about that. You briefly heard the sounds there of people on Tron from right below where the coaster passes overhead. And that was, of course, the big thing I wanted to make sure we did at the Magic Kingdom more than anything else. But up front, we purchased Genie Plus again the night before. Genie Plus was a lot more expensive at the Magic Kingdom, which is always the most expensive along with park hopping. Usually they're similar. $29 a person, so $58, then you add in tax, so it was about $61.78, so about $62 to add on to the ticket price to get Disney Genie Plus, and that was booked, of course, at midnight. And one thing I did is I did reserve the virtual queue for Tron, so that was the first step that I did in the morning. I also set up Standby Skipper to do Space Mountain, which I know Jungle Cruise likely more popular. We weren't we did Jungle Cruise last time at Disney World, did it at Disneyland, and I know Edo was really focused on doing thrill rides and coasters, and I didn't really know at the time if the Epcot crowds were indicative of the whole week, which they were, or just kind of an aberration, like a weird day, and that we were going to have still a crazy day at the Magic Kingdom. I will say the Magic Kingdom was busier, but there were a few factors leading to that. So I joined the virtual queue. Again, it said we were going to come back in mid-afternoon. So I went ahead and purchased then an individual lightning lane for Tron. I chose, you could basically choose whatever you wanted, but I chose 11:20 to 12:20. That one was $20 a person. So 2 of us, that's $40, and then you add in tax, $42.60. So you kind of do the math, and we are already, getting up there in terms of around $62 and then a little over $42. So you're looking at $104 added on to the cost. This is why the short trip sometimes can benefit you in a way, just because, you're going to spend more per day probably, but you're kind of doing it all in one shot. Well, one last thing that I also set up was I set up an individual lightning lane, finally, for Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. That one's a little cheaper, relatively speaking. And, even though Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, not like a can't miss, you must do it, still a solid coaster, and Etta was really excited to do it. And this was one of the attractions that I never saw a low wait time for. Yes, if we had gotten there before or during early entry, or actually probably before early entry, or maybe at the very, very end of the night we could have done it. But I just figured this was worth it. I mean, worth it is a questionable term. $12 a person, two of us, that's $24. Add in tax, then you're looking at $25.56. So, and again, I'm not doing this to give you some sort of big argument on expense versus, is it too expensive? Is it not? It's a lot. You figure 25 plus 62 plus 42 for two people, you're looking at 104 plus 25. So, 129. So that's about $65 extra per person spending on Genie Plus and on individual lightning lanes. Now, yes, we could have done the virtual queue for Tron and not bought that. And obviously, there were a few ways to do Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. So there are ways around it. Genie Plus is a little trickier. There is enough at the Magic Kingdom to do where you can have a full day without Genie Plus, and the wait times were not that bad. So in hindsight, I don't regret choosing it, because I still feel like for me, with this short trip and with the things we wanted to do, it was just kind of going to cost a decent amount of money. But that gives you an idea. Also, Standby Skipper booked us immediately 9 to 10 Space Mountain. So again, right off the bat, getting that very good track record there. Of course, we were out so late the night before that I actually started to get concerned that we wouldn't make it by 10 a.m. because I wanted Etta to have a chance to sleep, and I didn't want us to rush because I knew we were going to stay till close, which is 10 p.m. Wanted to watch Happily Ever After, which was at 8:30. So I ended up going in and modifying it and pushing it back about an hour. Well, it didn't really matter at all what I did there, because Space Mountain was closed for much of the day. And that is the big headline of this day beyond going to see Tron. At the start of the day, we arrived around 10. And at the start of the day, Space Mountain, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad were down. And this was not just a 20-minute thing. Space Mountain was down till late afternoon, early evening. Big Thunder and Pirates were down till early afternoon. And so what that did in the morning is it made the wait times for everything else go up. It made Genie Plus kind of change. And, kind of really, you could see people being a bit confused because a lot of people had planned to go to maybe Big Thunder or Space Mountain, and not being able to do that, it just kind of, it added, like you saw the line for Buzz Lightyear get very long. There was a bit of a line for the People Mover. This is in Tomorrowland, Speedway, everything else, because people went to do Space Mountain, went, and then moved from there. Our Lightning Lane reservation for Space Mountain converted to an anytime Lightning Lane. I was a little nervous. Every time we went to another attraction, I thought, oh no, it's going to take the anytime one. But Genie Plus worked the whole way, where that never actually happened. So when we arrived about 10, very easy again, but we took the bus this time. We didn't mess with the ferry or parking or anything. We just went in, and Etta really wanted to do the Speedway. And I also thought maybe Space Mountain will open. Oh, Dan. Oh, naive Dan. Sooner. So we went to the Tomorrowland Speedway because that's what Etta really wanted to do. And at the time, I did not realize whether it was just these rides being down or if this was going to be kind of a crazy day. So when you see the Speedway 20-minute wait, you go, okay, that works. I will say the Speedway, since the last I rode it, is even shorter, thanks to Tron, but it was fine. The main thing is, which I get, you can easily look at it and be like, this does not fit in Tomorrowland. It even looks weirder with Tron there, and that is totally true. But Etta really liked it. It's the first time she'd driven, so that was fun. She wanted to do it again. She really enjoyed it. They opened a new lane, so that sped it up. We probably waited almost 20 minutes. We got some exhaust in our face, but unlike Disneyland, the cars weren't breaking down constantly, but it is what it is. Next up, though, we were kind of still seeing how it would go. We had booked a Buzz Lightyear Lightning Lane when we got to that point, but before we did that, we rode People Mover.
Look, there's even a tiny People Mover. I wonder if that means there's a tiny ORAC.
I realized as we were riding People Mover, like, wait, Space Mountain's lights are going to be on. So got out my phone, took terrible video probably. You'll find its way to the YouTube channel. But did enjoy that. And we actually got stopped inside Space Mountain at one point near where the incline is for Space Mountain when we were on the People Mover. So we got to see that with the lights on completely, and even the People Mover area lights on because that broke down, but it did ultimately end up moving. So we enjoyed that. And after a little while, we went to Buzz Lightyear and got in line, wasn't really moving, and then it was down. So what they did this time, because we were Lightning Lane and we had already scanned in, is they had us walk through the line, which wasn't that far, and then at the end, they scanned it so they would give us another lightning lane. Not something they do on standby, but because we were that way, again, an anytime lightning lane did not allow us to do Space Mountain, but did allow us to do you could do a lot of secondary attractions. So we had that for Buzz Lightyear or something else whenever we wanted it, which now led us to Tron. As you can see, we'd had a little bit of a rough start this time. This was really the only day where downtime became an issue, but we went on to Tron. Our time had been reached. It was like, okay, let's do this. And I had not watched any full-on ride videos or even, full experience videos of Tron to that point. I had seen, the basics of the launch and everything just through marketing materials and just kind of what you see as you go, but really hadn't watched much of it. Didn't know how the whole experience went. And it was super cool. We went in there and they have you go in that room, which I honestly didn't know what was going to happen. We thought it was going to be more one of those where you're blocked off. You can't see what's going to happen. It looks like maybe the door would open in front of us and there was going to be something, or it was kind of a fake elevator. But instead it was like we were being placed into the grid, and then there's the reveal where it clears up and you can see the people getting ready to launch on Tron. Very cool effect. I thought it was super neat, kind of a nice way to a big reveal. And the inside of Tron is very impressive. Actually, just go out even further, the entire area is awesome. It's almost like its own mini land where you go past Space Mountain, which used to just kind of be that walkway over to Storybook Circus. But now you're kind of up high, and then you walk all the way through, and there's an area where you can buy some refreshments. There's, a whole setup there, and then ultimately you get over there. But it's massive, not just Tron and its location, but the entire area. And that show building is so huge. We saw it from the Speedway. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize there was that whole other building behind it, which makes sense. Like any big ride, the facade is not going to hold the entire thing, but it does have the launch right there. And then you go on for quite a while after that. The interior setup is great. This does not have the double loading like Guardians, so it seems to take a little longer to load. And I will say the ride vehicles have a very strange setup. My legs were kind of hanging out and they had to move those in. And the way it kind of, you pull up and then it comes down on your back. I totally get it though. If you're going to be in that type of leaning forward setup, you can't have it where you're just kind of hanging out over there. They want you to be kind of locked in for safety purposes. This is different than some other straddle coasters where it's more like you're kind of sitting in a chair. You're actually leaning forward. And I will say, if you're somebody that has back issues or just doesn't, you don't have the best mobility, it's going to feel weird. And it's quick. But what happened with us is we were actually in the last row, which a little more intense. Very cool. I thought that was great for the launch especially. But you get on, it goes around the side, gets ready to launch, you stop there, and then there was some sort of minor technical issue where we sat there for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And at first I thought that was just part of the show, that it would take that long and it's kind of a surprise. But then I realized, no, normally it doesn't take that long at all. And I just found I wouldn't have thought that was a big deal, except for I was in this kind of awkward position. I feel like I wasn't entirely sitting correctly on there with the way I was leaning. So that took a while. But then they count down, like, okay, they are going to count down to the launch. And I will say, it's awesome. I mean, I know the feedback is generally that it's short, and it is a short coaster. But to me, the thrills outshine the shorter length. It looks impressive. This is not a Seven Dwarfs Mine Train kind of situation where you have the cool dark ride and then you're like, oh, it's done, or Wandering Oakens at in Hong Kong, which recently reopened, or Barnstormer or something. This is super impressive. It looks great. I think some of the visual effects are great. And also I think for Disney too, if you're able to pack in a ton of thrills into a short package and there's no like lift hill or something that's going to slow you down at the beginning, a la something like a Space Mountain or a Big Thunder with the 3 lift hills. So you're basically packing in the ride itself is most of the time. So it's not as short as it feels, but I thought that launch is, because of the way you're sitting, the launch is even more impressive than it would be if you were sitting up. Obviously, given the speed, it creates that intensity, and then the way it kind of goes through the structure. I didn't get a chance to do it at night, but wow, I think that would be even so much more impressive with the way everything's lit up. And so it's one of those things where Comparing it to Guardians, I think Guardians is a slightly better ride. But again, it's what you're interested in. If you're looking for just pure thrills, I think Tron for pure thrills is more thrilling than Guardians. But Guardians overall is more complete. It has more things going on. It's much longer, and there's the music and the backward launch, the spinning, and everything else. But the Tron area, and I know I was talking to a friend of mine recently about this, where he mentioned that he thought the Tron area was more impressive than Guardians, and I agree. I think just the whole experience of going through, and also the locker system for Tron works really well. It's the first time Disney has done this at Walt Disney World, where you have to store items in a locker. Totally understandable, because you don't have like your typical pouch that you can put it in front of you like that. They have you leaning forward, and basically you just scan your Magic Band or ticket or whatever, so no need to remember a combination or something like that. You just got to remember which number your locker is, which is like a 3-digit number, and then you come around, you're on the other side, and you scan again, and it opens. We had a little problem opening our locker, but the cast member helped us. You had to kind of push in, and then it worked. Kind of similar to a normal locker in a way, but we were able to make it work, and that was super cool. And again, similar situation. I think Etta really enjoyed it, but did not want to do it a second time. They called our virtual queue, but then we decided that we were not going to go back. One, we were all on the other side of the park at that point, doing kind of other lands besides Tomorrowland, because we spent a good portion of the morning in Tomorrowland and then went from there. But Tron, I love the fact that it's an addition to the Magic Kingdom and not a replacement. Adds capacity, adds excitement, and takes the pressure off some of the other headliners when they're not working so well. Next up, we did Buzz Lightyear as a lightning lane. It was back up. It's fun. I like the physical sets. I didn't do particularly well this time. I only had like 60,000. I haven't gone and read about how to get Galactic Hero. I still kind of like the idea of just trying to figure it out on my own. But always fun. Got off that, immediately went to Carousel of Progress. Still looking good. No real, they still talk about Laserdisc and everything else, but we enjoyed that. Pretty good crowd in there. I think they may have redone the seats at some point because they seem a little better than I remembered. Solid thing, no waits. I still like Carousel of Progress quite a bit. Then we went on and did our individual lightning lanes for Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, where again we were sitting near the back, which has a little more force to it. I think we were second last row. And I like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. I think it packs in the thrills really nicely, where you get to have some fun. I especially like after the dark ride portion, which looks cool, even though, again, the animatronics look a little shaky, kind of like Frozen, but not as bad. And that double down drop near the waterfall is really neat effect. And we also had two people sitting in front of us who did a lot of swinging back and forth, which I think did actually make our cars swing a little more. I hadn't really thought about that in the past, but Seven Dwarfs, it's all to say if it's worth the money and all that, but the line was still about 70, 80 minutes, so I think it was totally worth it even for a slower day. Then we started piling up the lightning lanes. We did Dumbo, which would have had about a 30-minute wait. Did Lightning Lane, just waited a few minutes. Then we did Little Mermaid. It's fine. It's the animatronics still look creepy, but I think it's a solid dark ride. I appreciate that it doesn't have much of a line, especially the Lightning Lane is a very short walk. You're in there fast, and I think it was like 30, 40 minutes, so we saved some time there. I've talked about Ariel a lot, same as, we talked about it with California, and it's just, I like the exterior more. Now it was finally time. All we had done up to this point was Tomorrowland and Fantasyland, and we were ready into mid-afternoon. We had a lightning lane for Big Thunder at 4:20, so we had a few time to kill. So we went in the Swiss Family Treehouse, which was slowed down a bit because we were following a dad and his son the son could barely walk. And so it took the son forever. And I will say those steps are pretty steep on the Swiss Family Treehouse, but I hadn't been in there in a while. Ed had never been in there, no big complaints. I thought it was good fun for sure. And then we went to Tiki Room. Tiki Room, always a great choice. And again, another one you can do without really any wait, even though we did just miss the show. So we waited about 10 minutes. But I enjoy Tiki Room. I'm glad that it's still the classic show. Don't feel like it needs to be updated. And drew a big crowd, which is always good. Then we did Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Love that ride. And we'll talk about it more a bit later. But, just the right amount of mix of thrills, pause, great theming. Continuing to move up my list of roller coasters at Walt Disney World. Also did Small World Standby after that because we still had to wait to book another one because we actually booked Haunted Mansion for a bit later. So we did It's a Small World. All good. They actually put out his name on the board, which I didn't even realize for sure they still use the board at the end where they used to. It was a big deal when Magic Bands were new that they would scan the Magic Bands and you'd get your name. So that was a fun part of it. And then did Haunted Mansion. I saw the Hatbox Ghosts, which still in a weird location. I think the effect looks cool. I don't have a problem with it being in this Haunted Mansion at all. It just fits so well in the location at Disneyland. And here it's so early in the ride. You go down the hallway and all of a sudden it's there. There was a fun moment. Well, fun in hindsight, a bit weird, where we went in, used the lightning lane, went through the stretching room, and then got to what has become kind of a crazy area where everyone comes out and just sprints for where you're going to board your Doom buggies. And this was already kind of backed up. And I was like, wow, there are so many people there. And cast members kept telling us to move forward and get closer. And the Doom buggies had stopped. So they were taking someone, it could have been someone that needed accessibility or whatnot. And they just kept throwing more people out of the stretching rooms. And you would hear the ghost host at the end go, "Oh, I didn't mean to frighten you." And then more people come out and everybody started to be like, okay, that's a lot of people. Stop sending people. So we kept telling us to move forward and we had nowhere else we can go. And it was, pretty tight. And I know, we're not as concerned with, being that close to people, but still not my favorite thing, but finally they stopped sending people and then it went. And then our ride stopped several times, including several minutes in the attic right next to the creepy bride, which of course I was like, hey, a video. I don't have much to say about the Hatbox Ghost really. And just Haunted Mansion is great as always, but it seems like it's struggling a little bit, but that could also again be with the loading and everything else. But the Hatbox Ghost, hey, it's fine. It's to the point where it made such a little impression on me that when we were in the Haunted Mansion, as we got close, I went, oh yeah, we get to see the Hatbox Ghost. Of all the things that were new, it just didn't mean much for me at all. After dinner, we finally got to ride Space Mountain. I know people complain that it's gotten so rough they can't ride it. It didn't really seem to bother me this time, and I don't think they've made any big changes. It could just be the day and which car you're in and everything else. But Etta had never ridden this Space Mountain, had only done Disneyland as Hyperspace Mountain. Seemed to enjoy it very much. And so it was nice to do it. Still love the whole experience of going through that really cool queue. And the ride's holding up, hanging in there, still really popular. And then we did the Barnstormer, which Etta really wanted to do. I didn't really care, but we used a lightning lane because I hate that line. They do like 98% lightning lane, I think, for that. It seems to be one of the worst. One kid was literally losing his mind about not wanting to ride it, and the parents just kind of made him do it. So that's always interesting to see. We had gotten to that point of the day. Oh, I should mention we also did PhilharMagic earlier. Still love the Coco scenes. The show looks great. That was fun. Packed theater, I will say. But I'd done that. But yeah, Barnstormer, super short. I had described it to Etta as being as short as Flight of the Hippogriff, which she had done last year at Harry Potter. I think it's even shorter. But nice little first coaster. It's all good. Did the Speedway again because Etta wanted to do it. This time we actually used our lightning lane, even though the wait would have only been like 5 or 10 minutes. Got to do that night, which was kind of fun. It says something that this was her top priority for a repeat, was doing the Speedway and doing the People Mover at night, which we got to do. And that's always so much fun. We rode that. And then our goal, as we were getting into the evening, was to see Happily Ever After. As I said earlier, Etta not really that much into fireworks. And so, and the sound, she did not want to be on the hub, but there were still spots for the hub around 8:15, which is kind of crazy. And we walked through there. It was a little tricky, but I had reached out on social media about asking people where a great place to be if you were with one other person who didn't really, didn't want to be squished in the crowd. Some people said just push your way in, but we easily could have got a close spot. But we decided to take one of the recommendations, which is to be on the bridge over by Frontierland, which I wasn't sure how much we'd see. Now, if you want to see every projection, this is not where you should go. But it's basically the bridge as you're heading towards Big Thunder and Splash Mountain that's kind of raised up, so you have a view of the castle. And it was super cool, I gotta say, because you see some fireworks up over the trees, and then some fireworks over the castle, because you're kind of viewing it from a sideways view, and kind of like when you're behind the castle, you can see in front and behind you. But that was really cool. You also could see the fireworks in the reflection of the water with the lake right there, which was awesome. You could see some projections a little bit on the castle, but not that much. But then the music is full on being played all throughout the park over there. And so it was cool. I had never actually seen Happily Ever After in person. I had just watched it on YouTube, and normally we just ride rides. And I had grown to really enjoy it from there, which I know is not YouTube, not the best way to see fireworks. Loved it. Loved it. One of the top moments of the trip for me. And that view worked out perfect because it was so empty. There were just a few other people over there. And then afterwards, we were able to quickly head over to Big Thunder to do that at night. We did standby. I think our wait was about 20 minutes, and the people were running for it after, so the line would have gone up. Big Thunder at night is incredible. It's almost an entirely different ride, whereas in the afternoon, we had ridden it in the very front row, which is slow, or in the second to front row, which is very slow. This time, we were second to the back. So much faster at night. That ride is just so good. It's such a classic Disney coaster. I think it's past Space Mountain as my favorite kind of classic coaster. It's hard to even compare that to Guardians and to Tron, but I think it's at the top of my Disney World coaster list because of experiences like this. It's just, it's the whole package. Thrills, theming, not too many thrills, so a lot of people can do it, and fun. People clap, people cheer. It's the coaster that more than anything, I think people just love so much because it's just so much fun. And it's really standing out. And being able to ride that at night, that was an added benefit of seeing Happily Ever After. Finally, we did Pirates. Our lightning lane for Pirates, because Pirates had been closed till like mid-afternoon. Pirates had a pretty long line. We were actually 20 minutes, basically, from it expiring, and I didn't think it would work. And I was going to go ask somebody and say, hey, can we still get on? We had this, and just tried it, and it worked. So I had always heard 15 minutes was the maximum grace period. I wonder if at the end of the night, or maybe because Pirates was down, they're giving you more of a grace period, but it worked, and that saved us a bunch of time, and we enjoyed Pirates. And before you know it, that was it. It was closing time. Did a little bit of shopping. It's 10 o'clock. So I know I kind of sprinted through that, well, in 20 minutes, but I'm just going to sum up and say I think the downtime is still an issue. If we had had bigger spring break crowds, those rides being down would have just been disastrous. Instead, they just made it seem more crowded than it really was, because as those rides came back up, they drew long lines. Everything else went down. Most of the rides had almost no wait, or 10, 15, 20 minutes by the nighttime. And then that was also the day where it was extended hours for deluxe resort guests. We didn't stay at deluxe resort, so we weren't able to do it, but that would have really allowed you to do a lot if that was the case. I wondered if crowds would be worse on Wednesday because that was the day for the deluxe guests, but that really wasn't the case. It wasn't bad at all. So I'm going to leave our third day at Disney's Hollywood Studios for the next episode, as we are already getting pretty long here. I am also going to sum up the trip and the days at that point. Both these days, like Magic Kingdom, we did, again, 21 attractions, and we were there from 10 till 10, so 12 hours. Epcot was 9 to 9, similar thing. And we booked 9 lightning lanes, and most of the ones at Magic Kingdom did save us a good amount of time. We had, except for the Speedway, all the other ones, you had at least 30-minute posted waits. Some, like Space Mountain, were more like 60. We also bought 2 individual lightning lanes, so 11 total. Those, of course, cost more money, without tax. Again, 12 and 20, $32 a person for those. To recap which lightning lanes we got Buzz Lightyear later, Dumbo, Little Mermaid, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, Haunted Mansion, Space Mountain, the Barnstormer, Tomorrowland Speedway, and Pirates of the Caribbean, along with the individual lightning lanes of Tron and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. Yes, we didn't do Jungle Cruise or Peter Pan, but doing all those was pretty awesome. It was great. Had a great time. I will say, I think the Magic Kingdom still works out so well at night, especially as crowds get less. The downside of Magic Kingdom is, I hate to say it, but just so many little kids. And by 4 or 5 in the afternoon, kids were just melting down, even on a not hot, crazy crowded day. So that leads to, unlike Epcot, it's a little less of a, I don't want to say magical, but it's a little more you really feel like I'm in a crowded theme park, even when the Magic Kingdom is one of its lower crowd days of the year. So that's going to do it for this part 1 of my Walt Disney World trip report. I know this ended up being a bit longer than I expected, but I do like to at least say something about each of the rides we did, not because, you're interested in my thoughts on something that everyone's ridden 100 times, but it's kind of fun to talk about the experience and the way it went through. So what I'm going to do in part 2 is I'm going to start by talking about our day at Disney's Hollywood Studios. And then I'm going to talk about a lot of the other elements that I only glossed over here. One of them is our stay at Port Orleans French Quarter. I'm going to talk about transportation and our decision we made and how everything worked there. I'm also going to talk about food. I haven't really talked about anything we've eaten the whole time. And then I'm going to talk about kind of my 10 highlights from the trip and sum it all up. I think it will be a little less packed in, but still just a fun, great day at the park, and I'm glad that I got to experience it. So, and I hope you enjoyed coming along with me. As always, if you have any questions about my experiences, if you're going to be going to the parks and want to know more, or any comments, always love to hear from you at dan@tomorrowsociety.com. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so through Patreon and get access to some really cool perks. Go to patreon.com/tomorrowsociety to learn more. You can also buy me a Dole Whip or a strawberry Dole Whip with Barks Root Beer Float, which is what I experienced by going to tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip. If you would like to look up past shows, you can find them all at your preferred podcast provider or by going to tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with an S at the end. You can also follow me on social media. I am everywhere. Just look for Tomorrow Society and you will find me. And of course, check out the YouTube channel. I'm going to start posting more videos there. I also want to give a quick thanks to my latest review on Apple Podcasts from Matt J. from Ohio, who gave it 5 stars, said, "Great podcast, said this show is a lot of fun to listen to. Dan is a great host and gets lots of great guests that have a lot of behind-the-scenes content that is really interesting. His trip reports are on point and full of quality information to help you plan and know what to expect. Keep up the good work." Thank you, Matt J. That was very nice of you. And of course, if you leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, I will read it on the show. And I always appreciate all the support for the show. The music you're hearing right now was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Thank you so much for listening to this Walt Disney World Trip Report Part 1, if you can believe it. And next time I will be continuing with Part 2, and then we will be going back to some really good interviews that I am excited to bring to you on this show. Hope you're all doing awesome out there, and I will talk to you again next time. But did not want to do it a second time. So our virtual queue, our virtual queue did get called. Let's try this again.